our first speaker, Dr. Suhana Chattopadhyay, who everyone in this room is familiar with. She is the mastermind behind today's event, who's been really just pivoting us towards, today's switch in the agenda. So she's a postdoctoral fellow at the Maryland Institute for Applied Environmental Health. We work really closely together, where she serves as the program manager for the Global FEWture Alliance and also our UMD Global Stewards program. She is a trained environmental microbiologist with expertise in the detection and tracking of bacterial pathogens in environmental samples that are of significant public health importance. So she is going to talk to us today about the UMD Global Stewards.
Thank you. Okay. So these are our objectives for the Global FEWture Alliance. And if nobody has seen this slide before, our objective 1, 2, and 3 goes over coordination and connectivity, research to action, and community-driven capacity building. My talk today would focus mainly on our objective 4, which focuses on education and outreach. So our experiential education and outreach takes whatever we get from objective 1, 2, and 3 and try to implement that and provide quality experiential education and outreach program to train the next future generation of leaders in Nexus area and also climate and health. So, okay, so back 5 years back in 2018, we were awarded, so the University of Maryland was awarded a National Science Foundation Research Traineeship Grant. And we were fortunate enough to launch the University of Maryland Global Stewards program. This was an interdisciplinary STEM research program meant for doctoral students at UMD who would work and train and communicate across disciplines, ranging from food, water, energy, climate, and public health. And this ranged from molecular to societal levels, global to local scales. So the program now has trained over 60 graduate students through hands-on domestic and international experiences, as you will hear in our next talk, as well as research, training, and outreach opportunities, including biological, physical, chemical, behavioral, and computer science programs. So I'll go over the graduate program and the undergraduate program now that we have transferred it under the Global FEWture Alliance program. We made slight modifications to our original program that was funded by the NSF NRT program. So it consists of 5 different elements. And if you go from element 1, so I will go clockwise, element 1 focuses on coursework, both introductory and advanced food, water, energy nexus, focusing on food, water, energy nexus areas. Our element 2 focuses on monthly international webinar series, and this is open to all faculty, staff, and students. And if you're interested in joining, please let me know. I can share the Zoom meeting with you all. Our third element is the Summer Boost workshops. This is an annual 1-week-long professional development workshop meant for graduate students. Then our element 4 is the Global Winter Amp Experience. And as you will hear from the next talk, we do these annual short faculty-led trips, international trips. We've been to Nepal and Israel till now. And then our 5th element is the student-led committees, focusing on outreach and mentoring, social media communities, and then the seminar committee, which focuses on getting speakers who they want to hear from. A brief timeline of the program. The students start in January, starting with the winter amp. So they just got back from the Nepal trip. And then they attend the annual meeting one day. Going into the spring semester, they go through the introductory Nexus course, that is Maya 690, that is element 1. And they also participate in the international webinar series, that's monthly webinar series, so 4 per semester. And then they also participate in the student-led committees, that's element 5. Throughout the summer, they participate in the 1-week Summer Boost programs, that's the professional developmental workshop and the student-led committees. And then in the fall, they have the advanced Nexus course that's offered at UMD, the Maya 691. They also participate in the webinar series, just like the spring semester and the student-led committees. In December, they complete, present, and deliver the interdisciplinary Nexus research project that they work on throughout the year. And they also still participate in the student-led committees. So all throughout all throughout that 1 year that the students participate, they're still working with their own advisor, working on their research project, and also they form these interdisciplinary Nexus project teams, which they deliver the final project at the end of the year. So I'm very excited to let you know that we are starting our Global FEWture undergraduate program under the Global FEWture Alliance program. And this initiative is being led by Dr. Leena Malal, who just returned from Nepal, and she is joining us virtually over Zoom. So briefly, we have 3 elements for the undergraduate students. Element 1, again, we have experiential coursework, and I'll go over these elements in a little more detail in my next slides. Element 2 is the Global FEWture International Webinar Series, and then element 3 is the summer internship or research credits. So going to our element 1, which is experiential education, students are offered 2 courses, and they can choose either one of those courses to complete. Both are 3-credit courses. Maya 333 is being taught by Dr. Leena Malal. It is a global classroom course, so it's offered online. And it started as back in 2021 in the summer. And it started with just the UMD students. Over the course of time, we have had students from Kathmandu University join the course, and it became very popular. And then once it was integrated into Global FEWture Alliance, last semester, we had students from Israel and Tanzania join the coursework too. And the course is heavily dependent on the water, food, and energy. That is mainly important for global food production. Our second option is the ENGL 398B, and that course is taught by Dr. Heidi Scott. It is an in-person UMD course, which focuses on professional writing, and it's called the Writing About the Environment. It focuses heavily on writing it's a professional writing course, and it also emphasizes AI research, implementation in research. It's very popular among the people who are interested in environmental justice, among the women and people of color. And so if you're interested in any of these courses, please either contact Dr. Leena Malal or Dr. Heidi Scott, or if you want to contact me, I can get you in touch with that. Our second element is the International Webinar Series, and this is the same webinar series that's offered to both graduate and undergraduate students. It is offered currently Wednesdays at 9 a.m. ET. It's a monthly webinar. And if you're interested in joining, please let me know. I can give you the Zoom link. So all of these seminars focus on food, energy, water, climate, and health issues. We've had 4 speakers from our geographical Global FEWture Alliance geographical teams participate in our last semester, and we are hoping to get new speakers this year focusing on food, energy, and water. And you can find more information on our website too about that. Our element 3 for the undergraduate UMD Stewards program is the summer internship or research credits. And again, students can opt to either option 1, that is the summer internship, or option 2, sorry about that typo, the independent research credits. So option 1 is a 10-week paid summer internship that focuses on Global FEWture Alliance research, extension, and/or our education. So back in 2020, with the Conserve Center of Excellence for Sustainable Water Reuse and Food and Health, we started this summer internship for undergraduate students, and we had 7 women students participating in that year. Over time, we collaborated with DAWN, the Dashboard for Agricultural Water Use and Nutrient Management, and together we had 12 students that in the next year. In 2022, we had 9 students, and last year we had 12 students. And as you can see from the figure, majority of the students were female. We definitely encourage more female participation, people of color, and minority students. And this summer internship is led by Dr. Leena Malal. So if you have any questions regarding the internship, please let her know. The second option is the 2 to 3 independent research credits. So students who are not able to join for the summer, if they are doing another job or they have other coursework, we also offer them the research credits that they can do during the fall or the spring semester and participate in Global FEWture Alliance Lab any lab or research group and perform different activities. I want to emphasize that both the Global Stewards undergraduate program and the internship program is open currently, and the deadline to submit applications is February 9, 2024. And if you go to our website on Global Future Alliance, you can get details for this and the application requirements. If you have any questions, please email me or Dr. Leena Malal for more details. And currently, for this year, we have 2 Conserve. So there are a couple of positions. 2 are funded by Conserve, 7 from the Dawn team, and 4 by the Global Future Alliance program. A quick overview of the undergraduate program. So we expect the students to start in fall, but students could start in summer or the spring semester as and when they complete each of the elements. So they would have to complete the Maya 333 Global Classroom or the ENGL 398B in-person class that they could take in spring or in the fall semester. They would participate in the webinar series and participate in 2 to 3 independent research credits or a summer internship over the whole year. So once they complete all the 3 elements, they will be considered a UMD Global Steward undergraduate in the undergraduate program. Okay, and finally, I want to acknowledge all the funders, especially Global Future Alliance, who is funding the paid internship for the summer interns and the graduate program right now. And as part of UMD Global Stewards program that was funded by the NSF NRT, the Conserve program and the Dawn program funding all the student internships. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suhana. That was very comprehensive overview, and Suhana and I co-lead the education subgroup of the Global Future Alliance. So thank you so much for talking about that for our team. Okay, so up next, we have the UMD Global Stewards Fellows who just traveled to Nepal. And I was part of the travel team that went with the students. So we traveled to Nepal for a short-term faculty-led study abroad program during the first 2 weeks of January. So just the last 2 weeks. And Dr. Leena Malal and myself led the group, and our program focused on how Nepal is implementing different technologies and solutions that are at the Food, Energy, Water Nexus to ensure food and water security. So our trip included visiting collaborators at partner sites at Kathmandu University, Sanskriti Farms and Research Center, Zulekal Hospital, and others to learn about FEWnexus issues in these areas. And I know you guys also heard from Dr. Clive Lipchin and also Mr. Shri Krishna Datal this morning on work that they're doing in Nepal. So the students will give from their perspective. So I'd like to welcome all of our students who are presenting on the experience.
Good afternoon. I'm going to get us started on January 2nd, very early in the morning. Personally, still hangover from New Year's Eve. We traveled to Nepal, this beautiful country, and we're going to give you a short presentation about our reflections and what we experienced. I'll let Camilla start.
So we've sort of split up our presentation into the 3 regions that we visited. We were in the Kathmandu Valley, so we spent some time in Kathmandu, the city. Then we traveled over to Zulekal and also the Namabuda municipality. So in Kathmandu, we basically had most of our tourist-like activities. So we were able to visit different temples, which are UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And we were also able to have dinner with the Engineers Without Borders in the Tamil district. So just a lot of sightseeing and temple visiting. It was a lot of fun. We were also able to have a meeting with the Rinpoche and at Sechen and Srirap Monastery. And we were also able to attend a social networking event focusing on the FEWnexus at the Israeli ambassador's residence. And we were able to see some of the presentation about the system that Clive is implementing. And then in Kathmandu, we also were able to do a lot of tourist shopping and looking for souvenirs. And we were also able to have a very wonderful dinner with performances that are traditional to Nepal, again with Engineers Without Borders.
Okay, we traveled to Sanskriti Farm, which is in the Namabuda municipality. Shri already gave a wonderful presentation about it, so I tried to not overlap with what he already explained. But as you can see, he transferred this on site in 2016 to this wonderful place that we were able to go. It is a farm to table. We had one of the best meals I've ever had in my life there, prepared by their family. But we also did tree planting. I realized whatever tree I planted before in my backyard was very wrong. We learned how to prepare the soil mix. There is more than 10 of us trying for 2 hours to plant only one tree. But we were successful, as you can see Rianna here, tagging the kumquat tree that we planted. And that was the activity we did in day one. We also were able to visit the wonderful applications of biochar, biogas that Sri was talking about in his farm, along with the rainwater harvesting system that he has, which are all coming together for resilient farming practices.
Yeah, at the same time, because we wanted to have experiences along the food, energy, water nexus, we did some water sampling. We did wastewater sampling from 2 different locations. These were basically around the school where the Laguna project is to be installed. We also did the drinking water sampling, and which were from the well and from the municipal water supply. We also sampled water at the irrigation water supply sources, and all these samples were collectively packaged based on the required conditions and transferred to the collaborators lab at the Dolika Hospital for storage, awaiting for processing the next day.
We also visited Dolika Hospital, and Dr. Biraj gave us an overview of the hospital. And the hospital currently has 8,700 staff members and serve 2,000 patients daily. And in a year, they serve like 2.5 million patients annually. And the interesting thing about the hospital is that 25% of their electricity is generated from solar energy. And talking about the fuel nexus, so also they have like a biological wastewater treatment, which treats 0.2 million liters per day of wastewater. And also the hospital has different community outreach centers where they engage in community services, and they also give out loans to local community members at a very low interest rate of 4%. So these are just some of the figures, the solar panel, the overview of the biological treatment plant, and Dr. Baraj describing the outreach centers. Then also in Dolika Hospital, we conducted some water sample analysis using their microbiology lab, and we conducted some DNA extraction, like you could see Dr. Lina and myself, and also Dr. Rianna conducting some DNA extraction of water samples. Then also we did some E. coli tests, and also we did some filtration of water samples in their microbiological lab. Then also at Kathmandu University, we carried out some chemical parameters analysis, which includes biological oxygen demand, chemical oxygen demand, nitrates, and heavy metals. Then in Dolika, we also visited their drinking water processing plants, and the main source of water supply from the plant is Pachayan stream. Forgive me if I mispronounce the name of the stream, which is like 14 kilometers away from the plant. And the plant maintenance includes backwashing, which they do every 3 months, especially during the rainy season. And also they conduct regular water quality testing to check how the water quality of the drinking water is. However, they face some major challenges, which include aging infrastructure, because the plant officials told us that for the past 25 years, there are some of the facilities that are to remain unchanged and also need changing. Then also they face contamination along the distribution channels, which includes sewage contamination from the distribution channels. So these are just the figures highlighting some of the activities carried out in the water processing plant.
So like Amir said, we were there from January 2nd to literally just past Sunday, and this is just a few of our reflections there, just kind of condensed down, because we had so many experiences and we learned so many things. So this is just an abridged version of what we saw while we were there. So a lot of our reflections had to do with the Nexus and understanding how they use food, energy, and water there and what their relationship to it is. So we talked about, or we thought about the technologies that they use and the infrastructure that they have there. Additionally, we know that there is a lot of like a community involvement and awareness that goes into how they interact with the Nexus. One of the major themes that we saw there, we saw a lot of temples while we were there, and just understanding how that's a part of the culture and how the temples themselves use energy and water and food. One of my highlights is that in the temples, they don't have actual lights, but they use candles, which is like, because there are so many of them, I thought that was a pretty interesting aspect. Nepal is also very old, so they have a lot of old infrastructure. So we saw that a lot of the Western infrastructure had been deteriorated. The Western infrastructure had led to a lot of the deterioration of those ancient buildings. And then again, we talked about the food. And interesting, maybe this is coming from an American perspective, but we have very large grocery stores here. Like Costco would blow their mind over there. But they have very small vendors and they sell fresh fruit. One of our like favorite experiences there is as we were on the farm, we were eating food produced directly from there, which was great food, like Amir said. And then finally, we talked a little bit about the environmental and the health issues that goes on. I know one of the presentations earlier talked about diarrheal issues being a really big challenge that they have, having to do with a lot of their waterborne diseases. And then we know that Nepal is in an interesting topographical position because they're a landlocked country, which means that makes it a little difficult to implement solutions that require a large centralized network. Additionally, Nepal has a growing population, and that puts stress on the waste management practices. And then finally, some of the community services lack in rural areas, and that forces individuals to use unhealthy waste management practices.
All right, so while Suhana is getting our tech together, I will just introduce Taryn Devereux, who is our next speaker, and she's joining us via Zoom. So she is a global education specialist focused on the environment, climate change, food security, and gender. Taryn was a faculty member at UMD from 2015 to 2023, working across the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics, the UMD Extension, and most recently in the Department of Geography as a technical manager with the NASA Harvest Program. She maintains affiliations with UMD and is currently supporting International Programs Unit in the College of Ag. And I'll also say that this was supposed to be a joint presentation with Taryn and Anna Mae Glenn, but unfortunately Anna Mae could no longer join us today. But I just wanted to say that Anna Mae is currently serving as the 4-H educator in Frederick County, where she coordinates positive youth development programming for over 600 youth related to leadership, agricultural literacy, and global citizenship. All right, so thank you, Taryn. I will let you share slides and take it away.
Thank you for the introduction. I want to also just elaborate a little bit on my colleague, Anna Glenn. So she had submitted this presentation originally, and she was the lead on this project. And she, just for some context, she actually did her undergraduate work at the University of Maryland, followed by her master's of Texas A&M, and then joined AgriCorps in Liberia and was living there for about 7 years, eventually becoming a faculty member at the Liberia International Christian College in Ganta, and then ultimately the School of Agriculture director at that institution. This presentation is going to specifically focus on some of the community outcomes from a global education model from project-based learning. We've talked pretty widely about this course and this case example, and we have some publications we can also share, but we wanted to sort of zero in on what community outcomes can look like, both in the short and long term from a project-based exchange. If you look at this first slide, you can see just sort of the setup of what a global classroom looks like. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the model, but in this case, we had a course at UMD where we were virtually connecting with students at a Liberia classroom on the same subject. So, okay. Again, I'm sure many of you are familiar with project-based learning. Our approach, we wanted to move away from the more traditional project-based learning approach where projects typically represent a culmination of the course at the end. Maybe it's some kind of test or client-based model where the students are receiving a challenge or a project, and then they're working together on a solution. We wanted to think about it more collaboratively where the students are working together as well as with community stakeholders to identify a problem and then work on a solution. One really good framework I like is sort of the dessert versus the main course model. The other part I think is important to highlight here is that we wanted project-based learning to be really contextualized in the real world versus more abstract or theoretical. And oftentimes, especially in a US context, we see that project-based learning is framed really specifically around job readiness. We wanted to sort of move past that a little bit, even though we think that those skills are really important, and think about it more in terms of like community impact, global citizenry, and what it means to actually have like international relationships. And so here we can see some of the main like design elements of project-based learning: authenticity, student voice and choice, which is really important, and I'll get to that later, reflection, which is a continuous process, a public product, etc. So for those of you who aren't familiar, or just as a refresher, the Office of International Affairs at UMD, almost probably a decade ago, started the Global Classroom Initiative. It was meant to be a meaningful alternative to education abroad for students to have an international experience. What I really liked about this is that it's not only project-based, but it's interdisciplinary, it's collaborative, and then it's also virtual. And I think that makes it a lot more accessible to a wider range of students, and also opens up opportunities to work in places where maybe students wouldn't have the chance to visit if it's not available through education abroad. Another thing to highlight here is that we started this course in 2019 and did it for about 4 years, and we through the pandemic, and we saw that, you know, when we first started the course, it was the first time the College of Agriculture had a global classroom, and it was the first time their institution had that. But throughout the pandemic years, it basically, I want to say, tripled in number, the number of global classrooms across the entire campus, and that number continues to grow, and the iterations continue to be more and more diverse, which is really exciting. But basically, again, the three components of a global classroom is virtual, project-based learning, and interdisciplinary. And it's a collaborative model between two institutions. So our course was based on global agriculture. It grew out of a student club that had chapters both at University of Maryland and Liberia International Christian College, or LICC. And when I had connected with Anna and other students and faculty over at LICC, we thought about the idea of formalizing this experience into a 3-credit course, and developed that through the Global Classroom Initiative and their support. They provide both funding and a fellowship program, which was actually really valuable. I highly recommend the resources that they have there. The team is really amazing. I can't really speak highly enough about that. And for our class, global agriculture obviously is a huge umbrella. It's a big topic and that can cover so many different things. And I think that was another important idea too, is that my experience, I've worked in global ag now for many years, and mostly with quite a few higher education students all around the world. And I will say pretty much everywhere I've been, a lot of times students have a pretty narrow idea of what agriculture is. They think maybe of a poor farmer or sitting on a tractor, right? But we wanted to really blow that idea out and talk about, you know, farming and engineering, farming and nutrition, farming and gender, farming and technology and business. And so we created a seminar style course where each week we had a 3-hour class in which we overlapped about at least half of the time. And it was on a given topic area within that field. We invited well over a dozen guest speakers over the course of the class being offered, from different backgrounds, people who had worked in the field, both US based and in Liberia. We also brought in a number of extension folks, both UMD extension and extension from the Ganta regional office. And we wanted to give students just a real sense of like, this is what it means to practice these concepts in the field. And then from there, we started to build out these like student projects. And so students were paired together into groups. And then throughout the semester, they were working on these different projects. And another thing I wanted to touch upon as well is it's important to note that the students themselves came from very different backgrounds. So US students, you know, they're mostly, at least in our class, we didn't have a ton of ag majors, to be honest. And so they're coming into the class maybe as an elective or maybe because it fulfilled one of the gen ed requirements. But the Liberian students, for the most part, came from farming backgrounds. Either their families or themselves were actively farming. And so they had quite a bit more expertise and knowledge on just agriculture in general. And so one advantage I think we had in our class was sort of staggering our semesters. It worked out really well that a UMD semester started early, and we were able to kind of do a little bit of catch up on some of the technical pieces, and then also some of the cross-cultural competencies that I think really enabled their communication. So some of the student projects we want to highlight was a agricultural radio hour. So in 2019, one of the first student projects that was created was a radio hour on the local Ganta network. And so the Liberian students were able to get airtime for about an hour a week, and they would talk about any given topic that they thought was relevant, whether it was composting or nutrient management. And they would pull one of their professors from the school to come in and help and give expertise knowledge. And this also enabled folks who maybe don't have internet access or can't travel to an extension office to call in with questions, right? There was a Q&A portion. And this actually ran for a number of years, which is really, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. There was a high school outreach program, which was to help kind of recruit students into college, right? And to consider majoring in agriculture. LICC had a laboratory, and one project was to help build capacity of that laboratory, both in terms of like infrastructure and resources, but also positioning that laboratory as a community resource tool, right? So people who lived in the campus area, farmers who were in that area, potentially could come in and do soil testing at the laboratory. And we connected that to the radio program, right, where that resource was advertised. A chocolate processing company, so Liberia, up until that point, even though it produces cacao, like it did not have any chocolate processing in country. And that's a whole other big conversation, but student entrepreneurs at LICC developed the first national chocolate processing company in the country of Liberia, which was incredibly exciting. And that is still in existence. You can look it up, Red Amir. The chocolate is amazing. I highly recommend it if you can find it. But one of the projects was finding support for that, helping them write grants, things like that. There was a composting entrepreneurship project. And then extension evaluation, right, where we had a group of students work together to do a needs assessment and think about what extension was being done by the university, because they did play a big part in community outreach for agriculture. What was being done, what were the gaps, what were the strengths, and then we know what's the potential. And I will say too, another important point about the student projects is that they happened along a continuum. We didn't want to just go in and say, this is what we're going to do, and have the UMD students brainstorm ideas and then we pitch those to the Liberians. We did a lot of deep diving into like what's actually happening already, right? This was a very active campus and very engaged student body. And we wanted to understand what was going on. And then we wanted these projects to continue throughout. As long as we were offering the course, we wanted to continue building on those projects as much as possible and have them be connected to each other. So some of the student outcomes, we did a longitudinal research project on the course itself. We started in 2019 by collecting data from the students pre and post the end of the course, both UMD and LICC students. We also talked to a number of stakeholders. We did a lot of analysis. We published this a couple times and looking at like, well, what were the outcomes of a student experience in this course? And some things that we can sort of like generalize, right? Where we see confidence, a sense of empowerment, awareness, a sense of unity, broadened perspectives. New perspectives is huge. Professional and vocational skills, group identity, shifter power dynamics. I will say that among almost every student we talked to, the number one thing that they would identify as their favorite part of the course was just talking to another student, right? They just really loved the idea of like, I have an American friend or I have a Liberian friend. And part of that was also exposing them to different platforms, right? We made time in class for the students to interact, but we also told them, like, become friends on Facebook, use WhatsApp, like, use social media, sort of meeting that generation at where they're at, and allowing them to have their own more informal relationships that could be built over time. Another thing that I think is important to note here is that these outcomes are very culturally contextualized. So even though we might say new perspectives, right, or group identity, the way that a Liberian student experienced that is very different from the way that a US student might experience that. US students tend to experience higher education in terms of like self-discovery or job preparedness, versus we found that a lot of the Liberian students, especially the ones we talked to, they're experiencing education more collectively. They would talk about things that they learned in the classroom becoming immediately relevant. They would go home that weekend and talk about it to their community members. They would start applying it. So there's a different experience even within these broad categories. So some of the community outcomes, which I want to highlight as well, this radio program, it lasted for 3 years. However, I'm happy to note that the UMD Chirps for International Agricultural Science, TIAS, which is a relatively new group, they actually raised money through the Farm Bureau this past year and were able to provide additional support for the radio program. So I'm happy to say it's still on the air, which is really exciting. The Chocolate Processing Entrepreneurship Company, they've received a significant amount of grant funding. They moved locations off campus, so they have a new facility that they're operating in. You can find their chocolate bars in a lot of major grocery stores in Monrovia now, which again is exciting. They're working with businesses like an ice cream shop or a bakery to promote more Liberian national products instead of spending a lot of money on imports, right? The high school outreach project, they reached 4 different schools in the area. The composting project was also really successful. That had an educational component as well, where you're trying to talk to farmers about the potential benefits of organic composting versus paying a significant amount more money for chemical fertilizers that you're going to buy in the store. Extension evaluation, that was incredibly, I feel like that was the least glamorous of the projects, but it was probably, to my knowledge, or at least my sense, like one of the most important, just to get this really in-depth view of what's happening there, what needs to be done. And that ended up informing a lot of future grant writing and school strategy at LICC. The Building Lab Capacity was also a successful project. Let's see. So some of the practical considerations for adopting this model, my colleague Anna Glenn, she led the development, which I'm helping her with, on basically a fact sheet or some kind of guideline manual. We're working with the OIA on this as well for ethical partnerships with these kinds of collaborations. Our experience, and then also just doing like a pretty in-depth review of the literature, we find oftentimes with these types of relationships that the American students are learning about other folks rather than learning with, and that the American experiences are typically really centered. And we were really trying to be as intentional as possible to not create that type of unidirectional relationship. We wanted to make sure that both students felt like equal partners. And I know I've even seen that in a lot of data that I've read, where you'll read an article or some kind of peer-reviewed journal where they're using all of the right words around decolonizing education and like, promoting these kind of relationships. And then you get to the methodology and you find that they didn't even talk to any of the local students or stakeholders, right? They only gathered data from the student experiences in the US. And so we really wanted to push back on that as much as possible, especially given the fact that this is inherently going to be an asymmetrical power balance, right? UMD is a huge university. We had a lot more funding. We had a lot more resources. LICC is a pretty resource poor institution. And so how do we help mitigate some of those inherent power imbalances as much as possible so that we are helping UMD students think less about this kind of work as like helping other people and more about like a collaborative relationship, something that they could apply eventually in the real world, and helping Liberian students also find their voice. A lot of times in the media over there, they think that everything American is best. And we really wanted to push back on that and sort of support them in the sense of they are the experts in a lot of this, and they have an equal say, if not honestly more so, right? They're in the driver's seat. And so some of the practical considerations here, funding right off the bat, I think that's really important, and it's not really talked about enough, honestly, is that funding transparency, financial transparency is really important, and it can lead to awkward conversations, and it really also is sponsor dependent, right? We get the funding from some sponsor, and there are a lot of rules in which how we can spend that money. But it was important for us that even though technically these grants were in my name, the funding I'd raised was in my account, we would sit down at the beginning and end of every semester and just sort of say, okay, what do we need to do? Where does this money need to be spent? Instead of me saying, here, I can give you this amount. The goal was to facilitate the most successful possible course. And having that kind of honest conversation, I think, really helps level the playing field a little bit. Another important piece here is something like curriculum, right? So even though the students were taking the same class, essentially, the syllabi were not the exact same copy, right? They were parallel, but they were not equal. And that represented also assignments and things like that. We wanted everything to, again, be culturally responsive, to be appropriate for their skill levels, to make sense for what they were studying in a way that they could then meet in the middle, but that also, again, was appropriate. So looking forward, these are just some ideas for future iteration. So this class concluded in 2022. Both Anna and I, myself especially, I have been a mentor to the Global Classroom Initiative, and I have worked with a lot of different folks on developing new different types of global classrooms. The College of Ag, I'm really happy to say, has a number of them that are really interesting and exciting. And this has grown quite a bit around campus, as I said earlier. We wanted to, we want to think about diversifying partnerships, right? A lot of times people are hesitant to work in certain places in the global south because they think, oh, well, the internet connection is going to be bad, right? Power is going to be an issue, money is going to be an issue, et cetera, et cetera. But that's changing quite fast. And there are ways to circumvent those challenges if you really are being creative, I think. More modular global classrooms would mean that instead of maybe a full semester, you're maybe just doing a few classes where the students are engaging in dialogue, right? Or doing kind of mini problem solving. Education of broader internships, I think, could be a nice companion to this kind of course. That was originally our idea, actually, for this class in 2019-2020, where we wanted to have a study abroad piece after the spring semester. In the summer, UMD students could travel there. COVID sort of threw that under the bus. But we think that making these a companion types of courses would be really successful. Anna right now is a 4-H leader. And one idea that she has that she's working on is, working on more global exchanges for 4-H students. And then just graduate student collaboration, I think, is also really important. And I know a number of presentations today referenced that, which was also really interesting to hear just about what's going on campus. So those are all of my slides. We have some references here, but thank you again for listening to this very last presentation of the day.